Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the University of Toronto's Division of Palliative Care, Division of Palliative Medicine official grand rounds. My name is Dr. Nihid Desani, and I'm a palliative care physician at Unity Health Toronto St. Michael's Hospital, medical director and health equity lead at Kensington Hospice and Kensington Health, founder of the PEACH program at ICHA, health equity advisor at the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer, and an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. I'm also honored to serve on the University of Toronto Palliative Care Grand Rounds Committee alongside Dr. Nadine Guevara and Dr. Adrian Lebner. Both Nadine and Adrian have been instrumental in shaping these sessions to reflect the breadth and depth of palliative care practice, while also bringing forward thoughtful expertise and a keen sense for building meaningful dialogue in our community. Together, it's been a privilege to help bring these rounds to life for all of you. And now we will proceed with a formal land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on this land. As we come together to discuss palliative care and the power of human connection in difficult times, we also recognize the importance of honoring the legacies, histories, and experiences of Indigenous peoples. We commit to listening deeply, acting with compassion, and reflecting on how we can better integrate Indigenous values of care, community, and respect into the care that we provide, particularly for those at the end of life. May this conversation serve as a reminder of our shared responsibility in the ongoing work of reconciliation and healing. A few quick notes before we begin. Today's session is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing. To enhance video quality and video and audio functions are present for you. We do want this to be interactive. There is a Q&A section that you can use. Please feel free to use it. These rounds are Main Pro accredited for family medicine. Following the session, you'll receive a short survey. Your feedback is deeply appreciated. As always, if you're Royal College trained and interested in joining the Grand Rounds Planning Committee, please reach out to us. We'd love to have you involved. As palliative care clinicians, researchers, and allies, we are no strangers to hard conversations. Death, dying, loss, illness, grief. These are the daily realities of our work. But today, we're taking a slightly different approach. We're going to explore how humor, humanity, and storytelling can create safe spaces for these conversations, not to diminish the seriousness of illness, but also to help us find new ways of connecting, healing, and even laughing through the hardest of moments. Before I introduce today's speakers, I want to share a personal note. I've had the privilege of being on the Sick Boy podcast a few times, and I can tell you firsthand how impactful this experience has been. I've sat across from Jeremy, Taylor, and Brian and witnessed their unique ability to turn conversations about the hardest aspects of life, illness, death, and vulnerability into something raw, authentic, and yes, often really, really funny. What sets these guys apart is their genuine approach. They don't shy away from difficult topics. They don't pretend to have all the answers, and instead they create space for humanity, laughter, reflection, and for those awkward and sometimes uncomfortable moments that we sometimes try to avoid. It's rare to come across a podcast that can blend such profound insights with humor so effortlessly. When I first stepped into their studio, I realized that this wasn't just another conversation about illness. It was a celebration of life. It was messy, and it was sometimes unpredictable. That's the magic of Sick Boy. They make you feel seen, heard, and connected, something that we, as palliative care clinicians, can take much from when it comes to creating space for the people we care for who try to express their fears, hopes, and humanity. Now I'm thrilled to welcome our guests today, Jeremy Saunders, Taylor McGively, and Brian Stever, the dynamic trio behind Sick Boy Podcast. Hey, welcome.
Hey, yeah, thank you. No heat, no heat, no heat.
It is
I
such an
can I
honor.
just Nahid, I just have to say,
Please.
when you were giving us your credentials there, um, uh, please tell me like when you're crossing over the border and you're going through like customs, you just lay all of that out for them, because that would be so fun.
And is it like a new car where like it's really exciting to give the prolific bio and then like the sheen kind of wears off after a while and you're like, oh man, I gotta speak for like 5 minutes to say all the things that I've done in my life. Or does it always make you feel just like super revved up that you've done all this great
Because
stuff?
it will always make me feel like an absolute loser hearing how accomplished you
I
are.
actually felt the opposite. I felt like it was more aspirational, Nahid. I was like, man, I hope I could get titles like that at
There you
some
go.
point in my life.
Yeah.
I'm almost 40. If I'm not there yet, it's not happening.
I mean,
Anyway,
like,
story.
hey, Brian, he's the podcast.
Continue.
We'll let you go. We'll let you go.
You know what? It's actually just really exhausting, if I'm being really honest with you. But enough about me, more about you and the Sickboy crew. This podcast that started literally in a public library recording room
Mhm.
grew into its own recording studio and has now become one of the top-rated podcasts in Canada, a CBC podcast. Major props to you guys. This is incredible.
Thank you.
So happy for you. And what an honor and treat for us to have you here at the University of Toronto for Division of Palliative Care Grand Rounds. Listen, we often do these like traditional lectures in these rounds, but that's not what we're doing today. It's a conversation, a dialogue. And I want to say welcome to the pod, but this is not my pod. This is like Grand Rounds at the university. It's your pod, actually. And how funny the tables have turned. But today I'm really excited to explore how humor intersects with care, what we can learn about the power of storytelling, and how we can navigate conversations differently moving forward. So with that, are you guys cool if we just start at the beginning?
Dive in.
Dive in, yeah.
Listen, the three of you really do something and took on something that a lot of people try to avoid, talking about illness and death. And you turned it into one of the most engaging and listened to podcasts in Canada. And humor was clearly at the center of it from the very beginning. Jeremy, I'm going to start with you.
Mhm.
Your life with cystic fibrosis is really the spark behind Sick Boy. Can you share how your personal story led to the podcast and why humor felt like the right way to approach something so serious?
Yeah, sure. So, I guess firstly, I should say that as someone who's lived with cystic fibrosis my whole life, I was diagnosed when I was 18 months old, and it's something I've struggled with as long as I can remember. And I know I'm speaking to a bunch of clinicians that are probably very familiar with this, but as cystic fibrosis is like primarily known as a disease that affects the respiratory system. From an early age, I was basically like forced into sports. Unlike asthma, where you want to be careful that you don't like cause some sort of uh, asthma attack where your small airways are closing up. Instead, they're like, no, we want you to like be forcefully breathing so that you can get that airway clearance to get the mucus out of your lungs. So sport was like a really important alternative therapy for me, right? But something I came to learn very early on in my life was how valuable laughter was as well, like as this form of alternative therapy. Because when let's say I was a huge Adam Sandler fan when I was a kid, so I like bought all of his CDs and I would be listening to his like skits and by myself in my room and just like laughing so hard that I'm, red in the face, I'm starting to sweat. And that hard, vigorous laughter was just as effective as going for like a 6K run. It was like
Actually clearing your mucus.
literally clearing the mucus out as I'm guffawing, like yeah.
Which is good because he didn't use his percussor very much.
That's right. Yeah.
And because he was skipping it, it was actually helpphyl that he was doing
Yeah.
at least something to help with
The
that.
percussor is like a little machine that would like
Don't
that
move your
I could
hand like
use to like do physiotherapy. And actually, like Brian, it's true. I wasn't using it. I was using it, but I was actually using it as a vibrator because when I was really young, I noticed that it felt good when I put it on my penis, and so I kind of turned it into my own little like weird sex toy.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's neither here nor there, and probably
Sexuality
not
exploration.
where you wanted me to take that. So I actually was I graduated from TMU at the time. It was Ryerson. Actually, I didn't graduate. What am I talking about?
Getting close to the end.
I was getting close to the end, and I took acting. I studied acting, and right before the podcast started, maybe about 6 months prior, all the acting work in Nova Scotia dried up, and it was due to some political stuff. They got rid of a tax credit, and so I was having this sort of like crisis where I spent all this time learning how to do this thing that's so important to me, a creative artistic expression, but that creative form of expression solely relies on so many other people to allow me to do it as an actor. And I had this, to cut a long story short, I had this this moment where an idea came to my mind. It was like, you know, like those times where like an idea so fully formed comes to you, but you have no idea how. It's like the collective consciousness. I was fishing and I caught like a whale, and it was the idea for Sick Boy. The name Sick Boy was in the idea. The concept, or at least a general concept, was there, and the idea was, hey, look, I have this thing that I live with. It makes people around me really awkward when it comes up. I love to laugh, and I love to laugh about dark things, which I think is a part of living with a terminal illness, at least, or at, you know, a chronic illness for me. That was a part of it. So why not start a podcast where it's my form of creative expression? I don't have to rely on anybody else. I can do it whenever I want, however I want, and I can allow it to be about conversations about the hardships of living a life with illness, but specifically root out and find the comedy, the laughter, the levity that inherently exists in that place, although most people might not think that it necessarily does. And so I brought that idea to the guys, and, you know, these are my two best friends, and one of the things I love about them the most is that, unlike me, they are like dialed up to 11 when it comes to just like being a go-getter. And I gave them this, I shared this idea with them at the Halifax Central Library. And they were like, hey, there's a recording studio in this library. Let's book it and record it. And so that's what we did. We sat down, we just hit record, let it go for an hour. And we went home that night and like edited it together. And when we were finished, we were like, holy shit, this is actually like pretty good. I mean, you know, like we're three best friends. Of course, we're going to like love having a conversation with each other. But for me, it was so therapeutic to like just openly express and answer all the questions that like my two best friends had ever wanted to ask. And for them, it taught them so much about me. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, we laughed so much. It was so much fun. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of the start. And that the start, I mean, we just had to kind of buckle up and hold on for the ride, because it really took a life of its own very quickly.
I think the interesting thing about that too is like, Jer mentioned earlier about like his friends getting awkward when he talked about CF. And I feel like I was probably in that camp, you know, like prior to starting Sick Boy, I bet if Jer brought up CF, I wasn't like actively seeking out opportunities to ask him more questions about it or like stay on that topic. But I think the thing that, you know, it's easy to look back and say, oh yeah, like that's exactly what we were doing when we recorded the first episode, but wasn't so obvious in the moment, was this idea that if you create a space to knowingly talk about this topic, then it's not going to feel awkward or weird. And then like, you know, the humor layered on top of that just makes it, you know, not so much of a bummer. Like if Jared would have approached Taylor and I and said, hey, I want to record a really serious podcast where I'm going to talk about my cystic fibrosis for an hour, and you can ask, you know, all the questions you want, but it wasn't framed in a way that it was going to be fun or like that humor would be a part of that, then I think it would end up being a very different experience.
Maybe it would have made you clam up even more.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I'm really hearing is just how your bond as friends really brought you together, but also that the point wasn't necessarily to make fun of illness, but to use humor to make it easier to talk about the things that most people are typically afraid to talk about or to say out loud. And that's beautiful. And for those who are just tuning in, we're hanging out with the Sick Boy podcast crew. They're based in Halifax right now. Check them out on Sick Boy Podcast on every streamable service, and on social media as well. And that brings me to my next theme, that humor can be tricky in medicine. Some people worry that humor can trivialize illness or suffering. But you've shown how humor can really create space for honesty. I want to dig into that a bit more. Just goes to anyone on the crew. Can you give us an example from Sick Boy where humor broke down walls and allowed someone to share their story in a way that they might not have otherwise?
Mm-hmm. I think it's really tough. I mean, we've had like over 1,000 conversations now, so it's tough to like pick out the early ones. Sort of like really stand out because they were so instrumental in sort of like creating what would then become what we would do for now 10 years. I feel like there is like a moment in every conversation near the beginning where there's like a moment of real authenticity before the humor begins, where
Yeah.
it's like a genuine desire and curiosity to just like understand who somebody is as a human being, and then through and whatever form that takes, whether it's just like shooting the shit with them before we even start recording, or whether it's like a question about what they like, who they are as a whole person at the beginning of a conversation, that then opens the door for like, this is a space that I feel comfortable in. And
Mm.
sort of going back to what you said about our bond as three best friends, is that in the beginning it was like, hey, we have this connection between the three of us that makes it very easy for us to speak. Can we open the proverbial door of our friendship and bond and make somebody near instantly feel like they've walked in the room, and they're here with us, and they're in that space with us, and now they're a part of our dynamic, and they feel safe and authentic and vulnerable in a safe space to share. And then that allows like humor to flourish from that space and not feel like it is used as like a defense mechanism or something to poke fun at
Yeah.
somebody's experience, but to like elevate somebody's experience.
I have a very specific example of a recent episode that we did, where we were speaking with a gentleman named Terry Perivalakis. He's from Toronto, and Terry has a son who has a very, very rare genetic disease called SPG50. He like one in there. I think there's maybe
One in
only like
Canada.
100 children in the world that have it. And when Terry found out that his son had this disease, he obviously was like, okay, what do we do? What can we do? What kind of treatments are out there? And he was basically told, hey, look, there are no treatments. Take your son home, make him comfortable. He's not going to live long. And Terry was an IT tech. He worked for like CIBC or something, doing like IT security. And he said, well, no, that's not good enough. And so what Terry did was, over the span of 3 years, there's a lot of detail in this story, but over 3 years, basically, he started a gene therapy company. He created the first therapy for SPG50. His son was the first patient to use this drug, and it essentially has halted the progression of the disease. They've now treated 8 other children with the same drug. It's an unbelievable story. And so I asked Terry 3 questions. I said, Terry, what do you see as the hope for genetic therapy over the next 10 years? And he gave his answer. And I said, okay, what do you see as the hope for patients living with SPG50 over the next 10 years? And he gave his answer. And then I said, what do you see as the hope for your child over the next 10 years? And immediately he started to well up, and he started to well up, and he gave his answer, and it was very emotional, and we had to pause for a moment. His answer essentially was like, I just wish I can hear him express what he wants. I want to hear him say that he wants a bag of chips. I want to hear him say that he wants me to give him a kiss. I want to hear him say. And so we sat in silence for a moment and just gave him the space to like express this. And my follow-up question after a brief moment of pause was, would you ground him if his first word was fuck? And we all four of us burst out laughing. And immediately it took us out of this moment of like feeling that feeling that I just had, that I like a welling up and being emotional. There's nothing wrong with that. We had that moment, and it took us into this this other space where then it followed up with Terry going into describing all of the ways in which his son is playful and what he does to be playful and what that looks like at home. And it was so beautiful. And maybe the conversation would have gotten there if you know, I hadn't like broken the ice with this like ridiculous question. But I feel like that question sort of gave Terry the sort of cue to be like, you know what? Yes, I hope I hear him express these things, but let me right now tell you about the things that I'm so grateful for about right now, about what we do have. And I like it was, yeah, I think like that was like a moment where this use of humor that maybe some would argue is like totally not appropriate. But for the four of us, none of us felt that way. And it did like kind of lift this veil and allow for a really beautiful aspect of that conversation to shine through.
You know, it just strikes me that in so many of your conversations that I've listened to, you traverse this range of emotions that allows you to really tap into a sense of a person's humanity. And like, so, you know, on a day like today, you know, we've got, you know, over 85 people, you know, from the Division of Palliative Care listening right now. People are going to be going into patient rooms and hospitals, hospice, doing home visits in the community. People will be going into shelters today to have these kinds of conversations with people. And so, you know, when there's sometimes a tension and fear about the use of humor, what advice do you have for the clinicians on this call about how to use humor responsibly to help people open up? Like any tips you kind of, I'm just trying to really zone in on this one because it just doesn't get talked about enough.
But before
I do have an
I
answer
know
for
you
that.
have an
Yeah.
answer for this, Jared, but before Jared gives his good answer, I would also
Here comes
Here's
the bad
Brian's shitty one. All right, here we go.
well, what I would say is, and to preface Jared's answer, is like I would caution people when using it because as someone who, you know, like Jared was trained at TMU or formerly Ryerson before in acting and like understands like pacing and timing and like how to like make a joke land. And you know, with that example of the story you told about Terry, like if we didn't give that moment the space to breathe and immediately he's like, would you ground him if you said fuck? Like it wouldn't have been funny. It would have just kind of made, you know, like made the moment feel a little bit gross in that sense rather than like sitting in that space. And so I think you do like a caveat to what Cher will probably say is that you do have to be careful in using it and that you don't need to like go out and seek it out necessarily. But when used properly, it can be a very powerful tool.
I think one sort of takeaway tool that it could, because especially if someone who's currently listening to this right now or watching this is like, I'm not a funny person, or I don't know, like my sense of humor I don't think can necessarily mesh, or I don't think senses of humor should exist in a clinical environment, period. I don't think any of those statements are wrong or untrue or, you know, shouldn't be said. Although one thing I will say is that I have found that self-deprecation is an incredible tool to at least open up the space for humor. Self-deprecation is something that I lean into probably too much and a little too aggressively. However, when you use self-deprecating humor in a situation where you're around someone you do not know, it shows a sign of vulnerability. It shows a sign of humility, right? And so it sort of like signals to the other person, hey, I'm human. You know, we're human. I'm not.
Which is really important in like in the setting where like the white coat
yes
kind of like conveys this position of like I know everything and like I am the sort of like for wrong or for right, like the all-seeing kind of omniscient presence.
It's like if you feel like you are just inherently being placed on a pedestal because of your role, a little bit of self-deprecating humor can go a long way to level the playing field. And so it just opens the door for that other person to feel like they're in a space that is safe, that is open to vulnerability, that is humble. And I think it's just such a powerful tool especially when you're amongst strangers. Amongst friends, it's like it might become a little old and a little hack, but it really is a great tool, especially like in those early stages of meeting someone that you've never really had a chance to meet, or someone you've actually met a whole bunch, but they've never really seen that side of you. And it's like it shows a sense of trust, or at least it offers this like branch of trust that you can just leave out there, and maybe your patient is or family member or whoever will be the one who goes, hey, you know what? I'm going to reach out. I'm going to yes and you there, right? Yes and, for those who don't know, is it's an improv thing. It's theater, whatever. We don't have to go down that road, but yeah, I think self-deprecation is like it's one tool that you can always have in your back pocket, and it puts it on you, so it is safe. It's the safe way about it.
And on this podcast, we don't do self-deprecation. We just do Brian deprecation.
Yes, yeah.
Dep
With the
Brian.
three of us, it is very much like we're self-deprecating within the bubble at each other, which is like also does I mean, truly, it does the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. The white coat, the stethoscope, the scrubs, there's a lot of symbolism in medicine and healthcare and in palliative care. And, I think being conscious of power dynamics and really creating a level playing field is really powerful. And self-deprecation is a really powerful tip that I hope we can all take away. Listen, you've made a career, all of you, out of having difficult conversations, but initiating difficult conversations about prognosis, dying, what's it like to have a serious illness, and to open up people to the toughest realities of their lives. A lot of people on this call do this a lot, but some people struggle with specifically how to start the conversation. I'm talking about like the beginning, initiating. Like, what's the first question? What's your first move? And how do you do this in a way that's engages people in a trusting way to be able to go deep? But for clinicians on the call who might feel awkward about these kinds of discussions, like, how would you start these kinds of conversations? How do you guys do it? What would you say about, or any tips you might have around that?
I feel like I feel like there is and not being sort of like in the loop on exactly like what all of the like what are the things that a clinician has to talk to a patient about, and what are the things that are like non-negotiables, like you have to convey a certain level of information to somebody. But like asking like what at like finding out where to meet this patient, like at what, like where are we right now, like at what level would you like to explain this to you, like what are you ready, what are you kind of ready for? And maybe that's not the best way to frame this, but I was thinking about this this morning, because I got up this morning, I rolled up the blinds, and there's condensation on our windows for the first time as like the weather's been cooling overnight. And my daughter was like, why is there water on the windows? And I was like, okay, well, you know what? You're actually going to learn about that in school someday. And she's 3 years old. And I'm like, you're going to learn about that in school eventually. But, it might be a little bit tough to understand right now, but do you want me to try to explain it to you? And she was like, yeah, sure. And I was like, okay, cool. So like condensation, air cools, there's like invisible
We
water
got
in
it.
the air, blah,
We
blah,
know.
blah, blah. And I kind of like gave this sort of like as best as I could at for a scientific thing that is too hard for her to grasp in its entirety, try to like make this accessible to you in some way. And at the end of it, I was like, do you understand? And she was like, yeah, I think so. And I was like, okay, great, cool. Like, I tried to meet you where you were at in terms of like how I can explain this thing to you that you are ready to receive in a way that you can sort of start to grasp. And I'll give you the extra detail in another couple of years when, your brain is ready for it. So I think like meeting people where they're at and asking that first question of like, hey, like there's some serious stuff going on. There's a lot of things that either you or your family members should really be aware of. Like where do you want me to start? Do you want me to start with the really tough stuff? Do you want me to start with some of the easier stuff and go from there and understand where they're at?
I think I'm going to jump on that and not say that I disagree with you, but one thing that I do feel is that like as clinicians, and sort of stated this earlier, but like, patients and families come to you and their expectation, or at least what they think is going to happen here, is that you are the one that pathologizes. You are the one that sees the person as the patient. And I think that there's like something to be said for taking a patient and bringing them into the fold as a person. And so like an example of like a starter question, or at least a question, it doesn't even need to be starter, a question at some point throughout the process of like having a dialogue with say a patient is asking a question that actually has fucking nothing to do with the pathology and more to do with the human, right? So like an example would be um like if you said hey, what's now that this is your new normal, what are the things that you do in your life to find joy that you didn't before? Or like what's the one thing you miss the most since all these restrictions that you've been put on you because of your diagnosis or your prognosis? Or like an example, actually a question, this one might be a little like a little over the top, but like a question that we try to ask at the end of every conversation on the show with people who are living with a lived experience is, it's a two-parter. The first one is let's use brain cancer as the diagnosis. What's the biggest thing that brain cancer has taken away from you? And then the follow-up to that is, what's the biggest thing that brain cancer has given you? And it's like, it takes it, just those two questions, which are huge questions, it really puts the illness in a little box, and it highlights the humanity there. It really makes that person think about themselves, not themselves as the disease, but themselves with the disease off to the side. And so I think it's just like a matter of taking the patient and bringing them into the spotlight as a person as well, right? That those clinical questions, they have to be there. The pathologizing has to be a part of it. But how can you, within that process, bring the humanity to the table? And I think that's like, I don't think that's that hard. Maybe I'm living in an echo chamber, but like I feel like there's a million different questions that you could think of that are useful in that situation.
I also just want to add that it's like simultaneously the hardest thing to start those conversations and also the least significant part of the conversation. I know when we started Sick Boy, early on, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and I found it really difficult to go and have like the same type of conversation that we were having in a studio setting with my own mom. And I like dreaded this moment of starting it because I kept thinking like, well, how do I bring it up? Like, how do I create that space? What is the first question that I ask? What is that going to look like? And it took a really long time to get to that point. But in the end, we set up a time to sit down on the couch and have this conversation. I kind of framed it like, hey, mom, like I do these podcast episodes. Like it would be really cool if we had a conversation like this so I could understand where you're at. And so we set up a time and I went and sat down with her. And honestly, I can't remember for the life of me how that conversation started. But what I do remember is like how I felt during that conversation and like where we were able to go together and better so that I could better understand her situation and how to help her. And really, it's like the emotionally the hardest thing is to like just start. But once you start, it's totally worth it.
And sorry not to drag this on, I'll try to make this really quick, but it's like striking me very strongly in the moment is that like all of the conversations that we had, I'm a dad of 2 and a to be a dad of 3 very soon. And I realized that all the conversations that we had had and the way that we had like dug into these difficult conversations for years before I became a dad was like, unbeknownst to me, laying down this like amazing foundation for how I raise my kid, like how these conversations allow me to be a better father, and then how being a father then cycles back into how I have these conversations and how it's this cyclical nature. And just to say that everybody who's in this profession, like as heavy and as difficult as these things can be sometimes, like they are not just restricted. These are not experiences that are just restricted to like the hospital setting. These are influencing all of you as a human and how you like interact with the rest of the world. And there's so many amazing lessons and teachings within the challenging stuff that you have to go through day in and day out that make you an amazing human and a thoughtful human in like every other aspect of your life, which is really something to sort of be aware of and let yourself take it out with you into the world.
Yeah, very powerful. I'm really hearing lessons about meeting people where they're at, asking questions that are more about the person, not the pathology, taking the pressure off, initiating the conversation, and just really immersing yourself in the human experience. And, I'm really loving this because you guys have serious illness conversations all the time. So does our whole division. And so it's nice to talk about when things go well, but sometimes even with the best of intentions, conversations don't always go smoothly. And I've heard it on your episode. I've certainly experienced it clinically where sometimes trauma, raw emotion come to the surface, and when people are in vulnerable states, sometimes their grief comes forward, and sometimes their anger comes forward.
Mhm.
As podcasters who do this about thousands of these kinds of conversations, but also as human beings, how do you navigate those moments where things don't go where you originally intended, and kind of deal with the situation in front of you without causing harm?
We just delete the episodes.
Yeah, I'm surprised you heard that. I'm surprised you heard that. I thought I got rid of all of them.
There's a on the bringing that conversation into the whole sort of like sphere of like humor, is that we have this like idea that it's like a comedy podcast, but we have so many episodes where we start the conversation and we're like, oh, like humor is really just not going to be super prominent in this conversation because of X, Y, and Z. And so again, meeting that person where they're at and going, hey, there's a little quip here and there, but humor really takes a back seat and it ends up being really just about going, hey, we're just going to be three listeners for the most part during this conversation.
I think too, like I mean, and I probably speak for all three of us when I say this, but like when I think about my partner and I, and let's say she is upset because of XYZ. Maybe I had something to do with it, maybe I didn't. Um, it it does me no favors when when I'm hearing the conversation go awry and my immediate thought is, oh, you know what? I have to fix this. Um, don't fix it. Don't try to fix it. Just be there and allow it to play out. If the conversation is going into a direction where there's anger coming out or there's grief that is being expressed in these ways that maybe in the moment feel like, oh, this is really intense. Okay, then put the intense seatbelt on and go on that ride. And don't try to grip and rip on the handbrake. Don't try to push it away or avoid it. Be with it. I mean, I feel like we're sort of repeating the same kind of answers here, but like just hold space, and that's okay. Again, people look to you guys to fix, and I'm sure that becomes kind of hard not to feel like that's your job and you kind of have to do that. But some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things are just meant to be felt. And especially when it pertains to like really charged emotions, those charged emotions are in the moment and they're happening because of 1,000 different reasons. And there's no way that you're going to be able to cherry pick all 1,000 reasons and find an answer to all of them to like smooth this over. And so, and like, if you're in a position where you are the direct cause of that situation going awry, well, you made your bed, so just lay in it and give it a full night's rest, and then make the bed again in the morning and do it better.
I think it's easy to say that and even like logically or rationally understand that when you're emotionally regulated. I know that a strategy that has worked well for me is going to therapy, which I only started doing, probably halfway through this journey of doing the podcast over the past 10 years. I noticed that a lot of people that we would have on to talk about mental illness would say, you know, it's something that's really helped me is going to therapy. And so somebody in my like personal life would be talking to me about their problems, and I would say, you know, like maybe therapy would be a good option for you. But I had never gone to therapy, so eventually I thought, you know, I should probably check this therapy thing out and see how it goes, thinking like, oh, this isn't for me. I don't need this. There's no like acute trauma in my life that I can think about right now that I specifically need to talk about. And then I went to my first therapy session and didn't stop talking for the entire hour. And at the end, I was like, oh, shit, I probably do need to do this. And so since then, I've been to, you know, just over 50 therapy sessions. And I find personally that, you know, when I'm feeling emotionally dysregulated and I'm noticing whether it's an argument with my partner or, you know, a fight with friends, I'm more aware of that feeling and able to like step back from it a little bit more. But even with that being said, like it can be really difficult. But Jer's, you know, answer is exactly it. It's like, how do you sit in that space and not try to just like get rid of that feeling that you're feeling because it makes you feel uncomfortable?
The power of holding space, the power of silence, the power of not feeling like you always have to fix things. Yeah, really important conversations. I've been reading some recently been reading some palliative care research on different kinds of silence, like reflective silence, compassionate silence, like just nerding out on silence. I know, really nerdy of me, but yeah, silence is really cool, and you know, we need more of it. Maybe more silence, less talking, actually.
You know what I find works really well is passive aggressive silence. It's,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
my partner,
That's a dark horse.
she'll tell you it's effective.
You know, it strikes me. There might be a call overhead. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. Do you need to jump into action? Put your cape on?
Doesn't sound like it right now. But it strikes me that many of my colleagues on this call are trying to, through their academic work, research, and quality improvement work, really trying to change the culture of medicine and healthcare about how we have serious illness conversations. At the same time, it strikes me, well, I know you have changed the culture of like pop culture, like culture out there as a Sick Boy crew. You have literally changed culture about how we have these conversations and how this society talks about illness and death. I have a question. You've been doing this for a long time and it's only growing and getting bigger. Do you think we're getting better at these conversations, or do we still have a long way to go?
I think like it seems like over the arc of the show, like the experience of people is getting better, like the experience and that's like a mix of like a subjective experience and whether you are, I mean, when you go into a hospital because you have whatever, it's an acute or a chronic situation, or a palliative situation, you're getting basically paired up with like maybe a physician or a nurse or whoever it is that you're seeing. And like those pairings, you know, they don't always fit. And sometimes they fit like magically. Um, but I think that over the course of the time that we've been doing the show, it's been getting better, and we've participated in a lot of like similar conversations where we're talking to professionals that are in the healthcare setting all the time. And I know that there's like an ocean between what people who are working in like a regulated setting are experiencing versus like what our completely unregulated situation is on like a podcast, and trying to find like what is the middle ground between those two things, because obviously what we do on a podcast is not going to, like, people are going to get in real trouble if they just start trying to emulate us exactly. So there's like a middle ground to be found, I think, in terms of like what we do and what clinicians do and how people speak to each other, and like finding those like little nuggets. And I guess that's like what we're doing today is like, what are the little nuggets from like what we do on your side and what you do on what we do on our side and what you do on your side that can like blend together and be used like effectively to improve the conversation and ultimately like the experience of how somebody feels like they've been taken care of.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is such a hard question to answer with any sort of like, you know, any sort of specific data to point to, and I don't think you can, but I think that like if I removed myself from this echo chamber that we find ourselves in,
Yeah.
I think it it just is naturally getting better. I think it has to be. I mean, like, you know,
You see it in the world. Like, you see it in the world and how people are becoming more comfortable as a population with talking
Yeah.
about the things that they're going through and how it's
and
challenging.
I think it's just a gradual, natural, very slow evolutionary process. Think about, you know, Nahid, if you think about the conversations that your father would be having about his own well-being, and then the conversations that his father was having about his own mental health or well-being, or the, you know, like,
Yeah. Worlds apart.
Totally, it just, and we it
Yeah.
just it's going to continue that way, and that's just sort of natural. But like this right now, I think this gathering of us and everybody who's watching right now, I mean, I think that's a pretty obvious, like, yeah, this is a sign. I don't know, like, do you think 10 years ago there were many grand rounds sessions happening where, you know, someone like yourself was doing a fireside chat with like three fucking dopes that have nothing to do with, like, with professional medical know-how about the like, about how
Like
humor.
thinking that there was
How to talk to patients.
value
Yeah,
in
yeah. I mean, like, I think we're seeing it right here, you know, and so yes, of
For
course,
better or
it's
worse,
changing,
guys.
and it's, I think it's I just whether or not it's changing fast enough is, like, you know, you could probably argue no, but it is, and I think that's like that's the best that we can, like, hope for.
Yeah, there is that self-deprecating humor again. I actually see you as heroes and really inspiring to people like us who work in this in our field. And one of the things that we see in our field is when people come in to the emergency department, hospital, they're admitted to hospice, people have their first home visit. So much of what drives their perception of palliative care and serious illness care is driven by, like, TV and the
Yeah.
movies. And, like, you know, I watched the show ER growing up, and, you know, they did a study in the New England Journal where the vast majority of people who got resuscitated in a code blue, like, just got up and walked away and survived. And that's, like, actually not true at all, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to dispel a lot of what happens in media. And sometimes that is a difficult situation. But recently I have noticed a trend towards more of a focus on what it's like to have a serious illness or chronic illness, more discussions about that. You know, you working with CBC to put out your podcast is a great example of that. I wonder if that trend resonates with you. Yeah, I wonder what you feel about that.
Totally. I mean, like, one example that really shines through is 6 Feet Apart, which was a film that was made a couple of years ago. The main character of the film, she lives with cystic fibrosis. The character was based off of a young girl named Claire Wineland, who passed away with the CF, but she was like the CF poster child in the States. She was an incredible advocate. And this film was about two young teens that were admitted in a hospital, and they fall in love in the hospital. But of course, people with CF, there's protocols where we're not allowed to actually be close to one another because we can actually infect each other and make each other worse. And so therefore 6 feet apart. This would be before COVID, when like being 6 feet apart was cool. The idea is like falling in love, but you have to remain 6 feet apart. You know, when I saw that film, it was the first time I saw a movie where I saw cystic fibrosis represented in like a really like true way. And the conversation that spurred from that within the CF community was like, oh my God, finally, like we're seeing representation of ourselves. And I think over the last 10 years, representation has become a really big focal point in media. A lot of people standing up and saying, hey, I don't feel represented, whether it's due to my, you know, my race or my sexual orientation or my disability. And the response to that has been, all right, let's get some representation in media. And we've seen that happen. And so
representation has evolved too, in the sense that, like, you know, 10 years ago, they just put someone in a wheelchair and be like, disability is
Right.
represented.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
but now they're actually taking the steps to really understand those
And
experiences.
be full characters rather than like token
Yeah.
images.
Very quick, like, sort of funny anecdote. We went to South by Southwest and did a recording there a few years ago. And during South by Southwest, huge festival. It's everything. It's a film festival, a music festival, a gaming festival, a speakers festival. It's all in one. and there's tens of thousands of people that congregate in Austin, Texas for this festival. And
It's awesome.
we got to go to the world premiere of a film called A Quiet Place, which is a really epic horror film about these aliens that are like, just they've basically wiped out the planet Earth, and it's about a family that are survivors, and they have a daughter who's deaf, and the aliens can hear hypersensitive sound, and so the deaf daughter and the aliens that have like hypersensitive hearing, it's a whole like thing. Well, at the end of the movie, John Krasinski, who is the star and director of the film, his wife, Emily Blunt, the young girl who played the deaf daughter, they all come out on stage and they're doing a Q&A. And there's a moderator who's moderating the Q&A. And he is talking to John Krasinski and he's asking him questions and he's talking to Emily Blunt. And then he goes, okay, I have a question for, I forget the actress's name, the young girl who played the deaf girl. And he goes, what was it like you did such a great job, portraying this character who cannot hear. What was your, what work did you do to like prepare for this role? And he hands her the mic. John Krasinski, Emily Blunt, everybody on the stage looks at the moderator and is like, what the fuck, dude? Turns out the girl actually is deaf. She has no idea what he just asked her. The whole audience is like, ooh, you could see it was like perfect, the Reddit r watch people die inside. Like this guy just went, oh no, I didn't do my homework. But a great example of like, okay, there's some representation in a world where typically this guy would have asked that question and that person would have been like, well, I spent, weeks hanging out with deaf people and yada yada. No, it was actually this girl who just actually was deaf and nailed the role because she was playing the part, and she knows the part. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, but I just thought it was so interesting to see, like, hey, look, we're seeing it right here. Like that's representation, and you're seeing the shift happen before your very eyes because this guy didn't even know. He didn't even realize, right?
That means a lot to hear because we're so immersed in this work every day. We engage with the public who are engaging with pop culture and media, and you're a huge part of that. And so, I'm looking at the time, and I mean, a conversation with you guys is always fun, but when things are fun, they tend to fly by. As we're closing out today's discussion, I really want to bring it back to you, each of you personally, because behind the podcast, the laughs, and the lessons, you are ultimately three people who have lived through an incredible experience in creating a podcast, but a platform that people look to, connect with, and are inspired by. And so, I've said it a few times, you've literally sat with thousands of people and had so many conversations about the hardest parts of their lives. As we close out today, I want to start with each of you. I'll start with Brian. We'll go across the panel. What's one lesson that has stayed with you, something you carry into your own life every single day? I'll start with Brian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the biggest thing for me is learning to listen, like, and not just listening and thinking of the thing that you're going to say next in preparation for answering the question, but properly listening and understanding the person. And something that goes hand in hand with that is asking good questions, because you're not just listening to listen, but you're listening to understand. And if you listen and you don't understand the thing, then you need to ask follow-up questions. And that's been the most helpful thing, especially in my personal relationships. I find that my brain, and previous to doing this podcast, like as soon as someone starts talking, I have ADHD and I'm like connecting to what they're saying and I want to jump in and add something. And so I have to work hard sometimes to resist that and just be present, hear them, and truly figure out what they're saying. And it's made my relationship with my partner so much stronger because I think I understand her in a way that, previously, I don't think I was giving it the space to like really fully understand.
Yeah, in the era of, conducting deep medical, questioning and consultations and checklists, sometimes I worry that we are forgetting to just listen, and we are just preparing for the next question or not thinking thoughtfully about those questions. Thanks, Brian. Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the thing that maybe the podcast has just really reinforced for me is the fact that life fucking sucks, and at the exact same time is immensely full of wonder and beauty. We like, not to get like too sort of ethereal and existential, but like, if this existence, if this is hell, like if we're actually in hell and we just don't know it, man, not too bad. Like, it's not that bad. And at the same time, it's horrible. Life is horrible. Life is suffering. Life is absolute shit. And it is beautiful and it is hilarious and it is weird and it is wonderful. And I think it's like I just find myself over and over and over coming back to this like beautiful reminder that yes, okay, yeah, it sucks, and pretty fucking awesome. And so just like not to like lean too hard into one or the other and just kind of coast right in between, allowing both of those things to consistently happen and not allowing one side, the awesome, or the other side, the worst, to overtake one or the other. To just like allow both of those things to exist, coexist, and just try your best. I mean, that's, yeah, I think that's.
And if I might add, just bearing witness to all that, like how lucky are we to be able to have that opportunity to bear witness to that whole spectrum of experiences. Thanks, Jeremy. Taylor, what are your thoughts?
Something that really sticks out to me as like a lesson from like a specific conversation that we had early on doing the show, that has stuck with me from now, so 10 years later, was we had a conversation with a guy named Leighton Reed, and he had inoperable brain tumors, and I can't remember exactly how long he lived from the time of his diagnosis, but it was like somewhere between like 3 and 4 or 5 years. And when people live with and this kind of goes back to the whole conversation about media and how things are represented in the media and how then like the populace sort of thinks about these things, is that I was sort of I went into doing this show thinking that like when you get a terminal diagnosis, that like all the colors change and like everything gets seen, every moment of your life is now like changed and seen through this different lens. And when I learned from Leighton, being in a situation where he was not going to die suddenly, but he was getting this huge news, and he knew that his death was coming inevitably at some point in the relatively far off future in terms of days.
Dad.
That he was like, I asked him that question, like, do you see things completely differently now through this different lens? Are all the colors more vibrant, or is the music more beautiful? And he was like, yeah, it was for a time. And then like life continued. And like it's not my whole life. And my diagnosis and like the fact that I will die is not my entire existence. So like, yes, I see things through a different lens now, but it doesn't dominate every other aspect of my life. I still take things for granted. I still go out and get caught up in a routine where I haven't like taken a moment to smell the roses lately.
I still get pissed when someone cuts me off in traffic. Like,
yeah. And at the end of the day, even amidst a super serious, chronic, or terminal situation that somebody might find themselves in, they are still human. They're still exposed to the full range of annoyances and emotions and frustrations that everybody else is when they're in traffic or when there's something sucks at their job or whatever. And at the end of the day, like, your diagnosis and the things that you're going through are not every aspect of who you are. You're still a whole person, and now this diagnosis is just a part of that whole person, but it's not the person.
Those are some incredible reflections from you three. On behalf of the University of Toronto's Division of Palliative Care, Division of Palliative Medicine, I want to thank you, Jeremy, Taylor, and Brian, the whole Sick Boy crew, for sharing your humor, humility, and wisdom with us today. You reminded us that laughter and truth can coexist, that storytelling is a form of healing, and that in palliative care, our role is not just to treat illness, but to connect with people's humanity. You can follow the Sick Boy crew at Sick Boy Podcast on every social media platform, on streaming, on everything.
Yeah, Google Sick Boy. I'm sure you'll find us.
Absolutely. It has been such an honor and a privilege. Thank you three so much. Thank you everyone from the division for joining us. Please complete the evaluation survey when it arrives, and we look forward to seeing you at the next palliative care grand rounds. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the applause and hearts.
Thanks.
We appreciate you. Have a great
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.